They say that Crete does not sleep. Even when the stars lean close to kiss the island's ridges, and the winds hush as they cross the Aegean like tired travelers, something beneath the soil of Crete stays awake. It hums beneath the olive groves, like a lullaby sung by stone, as if the land itself remembers things long forgotten by man. And tonight we begin there, beneath a moon pale as bone, amid trees twisted by centuries and salt, where the cicadas fall silent and only the sea keeps speaking. A whisper, so soft you might mistake it for breeze, calls from underfoot. The air taste of time, smoke and old bronze. And if you listen carefully enough, you might hear it. Knossos, a name like wind on marble. A name that once meant kings, and now means almost nothing. But that, perhaps, is the charm of it. For the most ancient stories often were the quietest cloaks. Imagine, if you were walking barefoot on this earth, the ground warm, even in darkness, as though the sun still lingers beneath the crust. The trees above do not simply sway. They seem to gesture, as if pointing you towards something unseen. You pass a broken column, swallowed halfway by the roots of an olive tree. It's barely there, a stub of stone, worn and unspoken for. But it is older than any cathedral, and once it held the weight of a palace. Some say the palace was vast, a labyrinth sprawling and soft, like a city built by dreams. Not towering and violent like Mycenae, but fluid, curved, painted, alive. Others believe there is no palace at all, only the idea of one. That Evans, the British archaeologist who unearthed these stones in the early 1900s, dreamed too much into dust. That he stitched together ruins like a man, trying to remember a dream half lost upon waking. But the stones disagree. Sit for a moment, right here beside this cracked step, where moss grows like ancient script. Close your eyes. Breathe in. Can you feel it? A perfume floats up from the dirt. Not just time, not just wild figure, but something older, something strange. Perhaps it is the trace of a priestess's sandals, still echoing across time. Perhaps it is the smoke of sacred fires, smoldering in memory. Or maybe it is simply your mind, wrapping the present in myth. That's the thing about places like Knossos. They do not simply exist. They suggest. The palace, if you could have seen it, was unlike anything the world had yet imagined. Walls painted with bulls mid-leap, women with serpent eyes and bare chests raised to the sky. Corridors that did not end, but folded back into themselves like thoughts in a restless mind. Courtyards where dances replaced battles. Rooms that gathered light like wine, spilling it across polished floors. And all of it hidden, forgotten, left behind under centuries of wind, quake, and silence. Until the whisper called someone back. But let us not rush. History has no need to hurry, especially not tonight. Tonight, we let the earth speak in her slow, deliberate voice. We trace with fingertips, not picks. We listen not to facts, but to feelings. To the rustle of leaves over bones. To the murmur of forgotten staircases. To the dust that settles not as dirt, but as story. Somewhere beneath these olive trees, a girl once laughed. A queen once wept. A god once walked, maybe wearing the head of a bull and the eyes of a man. We will meet them all in time. But for now, we begin here, with the whisper, with the warm stones, with the hush before the myth. Close your eyes. Let the dust rise. The labyrinth is opening. Long before the walls of Knossos rose from the dust, before the frescoes caught the breath of bulls mid-leap, before even the name Crete slipped from the mouths of seafarers and kings, the earth was still young, and she moved, not with violence, no, not yet, but with the silent, shifting grace of something alive and half awake. Crete, in those days, was no island. It was a living altar, a place where sea and sky spoke in harmony, where cliffs blushed in morning light, and the waves sang lullabies not in tides, but in language. The Minoans had not yet written down their prayers, but the land heard them anyway. They say the world begins with a mother. In myth, she is Rhea, the Titaness who bore Zeus. When Knossos devoured their children, she fled to Crete, hiding the last of her sons in a cave deep within Mount Ida. There, the newborn god suckled on goats, milk, and silence, and the cave kept his secret. Even now, shepherds whisper that the rocks of Ida echo with cries of that divine infancy, that somewhere within its cold ribs, Zeus is still dreaming. But perhaps that is only a myth, or perhaps it is truer than history, because long before temples rose, people looked to that mountain and knew something stirred there. Something old, something vast, something that did not need a name to be sacred. When the earth was young, the people who touched it did so with reverence. They came not with spears, but with clay, not to conquer, but to listen. And they built, not in straight lines like soldiers, but in spirals like shells, in courtyards shaped by sunlight, in corridors that curved like wind. They did not build cities. They built rituals. Imagine them. Early Cretans, wrapped in linen, their hands stained with ochre and soil, raising stones not for war, but for rhythm, to follow the dance of the stars, to align walls with the breath of seasons, to let water flow like veins beneath the palace. They placed double axes, labyrinths, in sacred halls, not as weapons, but as mirrors of balance. Two blades facing opposite ways, two truths held at once. And above all, they revered the mother. She was not a statue in a temple. She was the sea, the tree, the snake, the womb of the world. Some archaeologists call this the birth of the Minoan civilization. But that feels too clinical, too cold. This was not merely a society. It was a sensation, a way of seeing the world where time bent softly and spirit soaked into stone. They carved no epic wars into their walls, no armies, no kings mounted on chariots. Instead, dolphins, bull leapers, ladies with wide eyes and open palms, symbols not of conquest, but connection. Was there violence? Perhaps. Were there hierarchies? Most certainly. But in these early days, the essence was different, softer. The people of young Crete were not dreaming of empire. They were dreaming with the land, not over it. The palace that would one day become Knossos began as something simpler. A place of gathering, a place of offering, a hearth for the earth itself. The columns, painted red like fresh blood, would eventually rise. The labyrinth would stretch. The myth would harden. But in these first breathings of civilization, when the earth was still young, all was fluid. Man and God, nature and spirit, life and ritual. No one yet knew of the Minotaur. No one had heard of Theseus or thread or blades. There was only the hum of creation and the warm breath of a land just beginning to remember itself. So sleep gently, traveler. Tonight, the palace has not yet been born, but the soil is stirring. The sea is watching, and the mother, deep beneath your feet, is opening her eyes. Knossos, a name not shouted, but breathed. If you stand quietly near the northern shores of Crete, where the land begins to yield to the sea and the cliffs soften into golden light, you might hear it. Not in words, but in rhythm. A syllable pulled and returned by each tide. No, sows, like the pulse of something ancient still washing ashore. No one knows who first shaped the word. It doesn't appear in the earliest tablets. It isn't carved into stone. It rises, instead, from somewhere deeper, passed down like a hush between generations, like the salt in the wind, like the smell of rain on sunburned earth. Some believe it meant city of knowledge, others, palace of the spirits. But perhaps, as with most truths worth keeping, it never needed a meaning. It simply was a breath, a wave, a name that remembered itself even when we did not. Knossos was not just a place. It was a sensation, a vibration under the skin of time. Its stones, even now, seem to hum softly when touched by twilight. Its columns, those strange inverted trunks, red as wine and black as night, stand not like sentinels, but like questions. What was this city? Who built it? Room after winding room, without walls of defense, without monuments to kings. Why does it feel, even in ruin, more alive than most cities in their prime? To walk in Knossos is to walk within memory, but not your own. The palace rises not from symmetry, but from rhythm. Its architecture does not dominate, it flows. Corridors twist gently, as if made to confuse only the uninvited. Doorways open into other doorways. Light wells spiral from above, letting the sky kiss even the deepest chambers. Water channels beneath the floor gurgle with purpose, leading your thoughts like a stream leads footsteps. And everywhere, the scent of wet stone, time, and forgotten incense lingers like a ghost with a gentle hand. Some have said Knossos was the first true city of Europe, but even that feels too small a claim. It was not only a city, it was a theater of life, a choreography of ritual and rhythm, where each stair, each fresco, each echo of footstep carried meaning. Imagine the sound of soft sandals across limestone, the clatter of a ceramic jar, the distant music of flutes and drums, rising not in battle, but in celebration of something sacred and unseen. Knossos did not conquer, it invited. The name traveled across centuries like driftwood. Greek poets whispered of it in passing. Roman travelers half recalled it. By the time it reached our modern maps, it was already a name made of shadow, a riddle, a rumor, until Arthur Evans, British archaeologist, dreamer, and mythmaker, followed that whisper in the wind and put shovel to stone. But even he admitted, as he walked the palace's fractured halls, that Knossos resisted clarity. It was too layered, too fluid, too old. It slipped through fingers like water through a sieve. Yet here it is, still here, still whispering. Beneath your dreams, the name floats, gentle, hypnotic. Knossos, a word that once danced on tongues, now dances on waves. A syllable of sea foam and silence. A city that calls not to the mind, but to the marrow. So let yourself drift, just for tonight. Let the waves carry you where memory and myth are the same. Let the name rest on your lips like salt from the sea. Knossos, say it slowly, say it like the sea would, and sleep. They call it the Labyrinth, a word heavy with legend, a word that smells of torchlight and fear. But Knossos knew no fear. There were no iron gates, no monstrous roars echoing down corridors. There were no bones on the floor, no cries of heroes lost in madness. There was only stone and silence and breath. Yes, breath, because this labyrinth did not suffocate. It inhaled and exhaled like something alive. Some say the labyrinth was a prison for a beast, a half-man, half-bull creature doomed to darkness. But the stones say otherwise. They do not close. They open. They spiral outward, not inward. And those who walk them do not vanish. They are changed. Picture it. A cool corridor lit by shafts of filtered sun, with a wall shift in tone from terracotta to rose to gold. A sudden turn, not sharp but soft, like the curl of a shell. Then a courtyard wide, breathing, full of light. Another turn. A chamber, intimate and low. Frescoes on every wall. Bulls mid-leap. Dolphins dancing. Women with serpents wrapped around their arms like bracelets of fate. This was not a place of punishment. It was a place of initiation. In the ancient tongue, the word labyrinthos may not mean maze at all. It may come from Labyrinth, the double axe, the sacred blade of the mother goddess. If so, then the labyrinth was not a place of confusion, but a temple, a sanctuary, a space where opposites, man and beast, light and dark, life and death, met and bowed to one another. Perhaps the monster was never in the maze. Perhaps the maze was within the monster. Or perhaps the monster was never a creature at all. Perhaps it was us. Imagine walking its passages at dusk, your footsteps softened by dust and time. A breeze moves ahead of you, but you never find its source. You follow sound, not logic. A splash of water, the chirp of a hidden bird, the soft moan of wind through narrow space. It is disorienting, yes, but not terrifying. It is like dreaming while awake. You feel something is being revealed, not outside but inside. Some knot within you, slowly loosening. Some burden left behind, turn by turn. And then perhaps you find the center. Or perhaps the center finds you. Not a grand hall, not a throne room, but a space of silence. A chamber where the light filters like dust and honey, where time folds into itself, and breath slows, and you realize there is no minotaur here. There never was. There is only remembrance of who you were before you forgot, of who you might still be if only you dared return. The labyrinth of Knossos was never meant to be escaped, because it was not a trap. It was a path, not a punishment, a passage, a sacred spiral toward the self. So tonight, if your mind winds in circles, if your thoughts twist and turn without resolution, let them. You are not lost. You're only walking the labyrinth, and with every breath, it walks with you. The bull, not just an animal, not merely a beast, but a presence, one that ripples through the bones of Crete like thunder, still trapped beneath the soil. He appears again and again in the art of Knossos, painted on plaster walls, etched into ivory seals, carved in soft, reverent lines onto golden rings. But he is not a symbol of violence. Not here, not in this palace that breathes. In Knossos, the bull does not trample. He dances. The frescoes tell the story better than words. A great bull, mid-leap, his body curved like a bow, his muscles coiled with grace. And beside him, above him, youths in motion, human bodies, lithe and bare, leaping over the creature's back, not running from the bull, but toward him, not fighting but joining, as though together they formed a ritual, a performance, a prayer in motion. We call it bull leaping, but the ancient name is lost. Some say it was a rite of passage. Others believe it was a game. Some insist it was sacrifice. But when you look at those faces captured mid-vault, you do not see fear. You see ecstasy, a thrill deeper than survival, the euphoria of becoming something more than human, something mythic. And that is where another story begins to unfold. You've heard it before, though perhaps not like this. The story of Daedalus, the cunning maker of the labyrinth, and of his son, Icarus, who flew too close to the sun with wings made of wax and feathers, and fell. But what if we've misunderstood that story? What if it's not a warning about pride, but a longing? A desire to escape, not the maze, but the body? To leap like those dancers over the bull's spine, and for a moment, to fly. There is something in Knossos that speaks of flight. Not of wings, but of movement. Not of sky, but of rising. Rooms flow into each other like air currents. Staircases spiral not downward, but upward. And everywhere, the feeling that you are being lifted not by gods, not by fate, but by rhythm, like music made of stone. Some have suggested the bull represents the sun. Others say it is the earth, but perhaps it is both, horned and golden, grounded and burning. In myth, Europa was carried by a bull across the sea. In fresco, the bull carries the leaper into the air. In dream, the bull becomes a gate, a moment of surrender to something greater than control. And maybe that's why the Minoans leapt, not to dominate the bull, but to lose themselves in it, to touch, if only for a heartbeat, the pulse of the divine. Knossos was no ordinary palace. It held no war rooms, no scenes of conquest, but it held this, a sacred arena, painted and sunlit, where humans dared to dance with death, not in fear, but in beauty. They did not fly with wings. They flew with courage, with surrender, with the knowledge that to leap is to trust the air, and to fall is only to be caught by the earth that made you. So tonight, if your dreams take you upward, if you feel the wind in your chest and the pull of something wild beneath your ribs, do not fear the fall. Leap, turn midair, and listen for the breath of the bull beneath you. He is still dancing, and perhaps, somewhere, so are you. The story of Knossos, as we know it today, does not begin with a Minoan king, nor with a priestess in a serpent crown. It begins with a man in a linen suit, standing beneath the Cretan sun, holding a notebook in one hand and a dream in the other. Arthur Evans, English archaeologist, romantic, restorer of ruins, and conjurer of stories. But Evans did not find Knossos. Not really. He recognized it, as if something in him had already walked those corridors, already heard the echo of sandals on stone, already followed the scent of olive oil and honeyed air through shadowed passageways. The year was 1900. Crete was stirring politically and spiritually. Ruins littered the hillsides, half forgotten by shepherds and scavenged by treasure seekers. But here, beneath layers of earth, goat bones, and Byzantine dust, Evans believed lay the palace of myth. Not just any myth, the Labyrinth. He was not merely hunting history. He was seeking the place where myth and memory merge. With hands calloused by travel and eyes sharpened by imagination, Evans began to dig, stone by stone, layer by layer. And what emerged was more than foundations, more than frescoes and staircases. What emerged was a story, a civilization lost to time, delicate and strange, unlike anything Europe had known. It did not resemble the grim Mycenaeans, nor the strict Romans. It was fluid, colorful, filled with spirals and dolphins, and women who stood tall, breast bared, eyes wide. To Evans, this was not just discovery. It was resurrection. He called it Minoan, after the legendary King Minos, a name from myth, repurposed as fact. But in doing so, he gave it form. And perhaps he also gave it shadow, because Evans did not merely unearth Knossos. He reimagined it. He rebuilt the palace with new cement, bright paint, and bold conjecture. He filled in gaps where the dust had spoken too softly. He added columns where none remained. He replaced the absent with what he believed should have been. To some, this was visionary. To others, a betrayal. Had he revealed the past? Or rewritten it? It is difficult to blame him. Who among us, standing face to face with a half-buried miracle, would not feel the urge to make it whole? To give it color, breath, voice? To let live again? Evans did not claim to be neutral. He loved what he found. And like all lovers, he wanted it to be beautiful, complete, immortal. So the Knossos we see today is a ghost dressed in dream. Some rooms are original, others are imagination. Together, they form a labyrinth of their own, one not of corridors, but of truth and story entwined. And perhaps that is fitting, Because Knossos never belonged entirely to history. It always belonged between the real and the imagined, between the past and the possible, between what was and what we wish had been. Arthur Evans walks these ruins still, in a way, not in body, but in footprint. Every column he raised, every wall he colored, is a whisper from the early 20th century, folded into the breath of 2000 BC. Was he right? Did he see the palace as it truly was? Or did he dream too hard into the stone? Perhaps both. Perhaps that is the nature of all ruins. Not remains, but mirrors. So tonight, if you feel the pull of a memory that isn't yours, if you find yourself piecing together the broken parts of something ancient and forgotten, know this: you are not alone. Evans is there, brushing dust from frescoes, repainting the myth, laying his hands on time, and whispering, "Tell me what you were. I promise I'll believe you." Not all thrones are carved of stone. Not all queens wear crowns. Some reign through presence alone, through fragrance, through color, through the way light falls around their form, gathering at their feet like reverence. And some palaces do not announce their royalty. They whisper it, through tiled floors, painted dolphins, and the quiet rhythm of flowing water that never seems to stop. At the heart of Knossos, beyond the main courtyards and grand staircases, past the processional hallways and open-air sanctuaries, there is a chamber wrapped in grace. The Queen's Megaron, they call it now, but we do not know her name. Not really. She left behind no signature. No tablet declares her rule, but her presence, it remains. The chamber is delicate, almost private, a place not of spectacle, but of softness. Its walls once bloomed with frescoes, blue dolphins dancing across waves, fish curling in spirals, as if the sea had swum up the hillside and settled here to sleep. The colors still cling to the plaster like perfume on silk, faded but not lost. And beneath your feet, a floor paved with polished gypsum, so smooth, it must have reflected candlelight like water. This was not the throne room of a warrior. It was the sanctuary of someone who listened, who dreamed, who perhaps ruled not with commands, but with balance. And then there is the water. In this chamber and in others nearby, the Minoans did something extraordinary. They channeled the island's springs into the very veins of the palace. Clay pipes, curved with care, carried water not just for drinking, but for living, for bathing, for cooling rooms with subtle streams, for rituals, for sound. Yes, sound, because the Palace of Knossos was never quiet in the way modern ruins are. It spoke. It sang with the voice of moving water, gently echoing through polished corridors, curling beneath thresholds, falling in rhythm with footsteps and breath. Imagine the queen here, not seated on a throne, but reclining in soft linen, feet bare against the cool stone, her eyes closed as she listens, to the dolphins above, to the water below, to the heart of a palace that never needed bricks to feel eternal. Some believe she bathed in a tub carved from alabaster, its shape gentle like a womb. They found it nearby, empty, ancient, intimate, a room with no purpose but pleasure, not opulence, harmony, a place to remember the body, not as object, but as offering. And who was she? Not a queen, perhaps, but a priestess, a keeper of rites, or a sovereign in a civilization that gave women not just space, but center. The Minoan world was not ruled by spears. Its frescoes show women leading processions, holding snakes, guiding ceremony. In Knossos, it was not strange for the divine to wear a woman's face. Perhaps the queen's chamber was more than a residence. Perhaps it was a temple of self. And still the water moves. The clay pipes beneath your feet buried for 3,000 years, still remember their song. The engineers of Knossos did not build like conquerors. They built like poets. They shaped flow, not just form. They knew that water is not merely resource. It is memory in motion. So tonight, if you find yourself seeking stillness, if the day has left you too heavy, too loud, come here, to this cool chamber of dolphin sky and whispering water. Let your mind step barefoot across polished floors. Let your spirit lean back into the quiet. The queen is not gone. She is resting. She is listening, and the water is still speaking. It's easy to forget, standing now among the ruins, just how vast Knossos once was. A palace, yes, but also a city, a living organism of passageways and people, of workshops and storehouses, of sacred groves and painted halls, beating in rhythm with the sea. And yet, for all its size, for all its grandeur and complexity, Knossos had no walls. Not a single defensive fortification has been found. No mighty ramparts, no moats or towers, no lines drawn in stone to keep the enemy at bay. Archaeologists still puzzle over this. Why would a city of such wealth and artistry leave itself so exposed? Why would a place that hosted foreign traders, stored treasures, and perhaps even ruled over neighboring settlements remain open? To some, this is a sign of naivety. To others, a testament to peace. But perhaps the answer is not in military logic, but in philosophy. The Minoans, we are learning, live differently. They build a world not on conquest, but on connection. Their art sings of nature. Their gods wore the faces of animals and women. Their architecture flows like thought rather than law. They worshiped with dance, with color, with water. They painted dolphins instead of battles. And their palace, this immense spiraling creation, was designed not to intimidate, but to invite. Knossos did not wall itself off. It opened its arms. It welcomed wind through its light wells. It welcomed sun across its courtyards. And it welcomed people, sailors, potters, priests, merchants, pilgrims, from across the Aegean and beyond. The sea was not a threat. It was a path. And those who came were not always enemies. They were guests. Perhaps the Minoans understood something we have forgotten. That power is not preserved by exclusion, but by integration. Not by building higher walls, but by weaving stronger webs. Of course, no civilization is free from danger. The world then, as now, held chaos. But Knossos endured, not by sword, but by spirit. For centuries, it stood unfortified, and still it thrived. Its protection may have been less visible and more internal, a complex of culture, belief, and beauty so radiant, so sacred, that perhaps it simply wasn't worth destroying, or perhaps it was protected by something else entirely. There is a myth quiet, obscure, that the goddess of the land, the same who held the snakes and crowned the mountain peaks, promised sanctuary to her people, so long as they honored the earth and kept the cycles. And so they built not walls, but labyrinths, not to keep others out, but to draw the sacred in. Knossos, then, may not have needed walls, because its greatest protection was not stone, but meaning, a city built like a poem. And who would lay siege to a poem? And yet, time came, as it always does. The sea shifted, the skies darkened, and eventually, something changed. The peace unraveled. The palace fell, but its walls never cracked from war. They crumbled from age, from neglect, from silence. And even in ruin, they still do not keep you out. They welcome you to walk their corridors, to breathe their air, to wonder. So tonight, let go of your own walls. Let the defenses soften. Let your thoughts flow like warm wind through a Minoan courtyard. Knossos is still here, open, gentle, and unwalled, and it offers you, even now, the kind of peace that needs no stone to stand. It does not gleam with the hunger of iron. It does not thirst for blood. And yet, the Labyrinth, that double-headed axe, is one of the oldest, most enduring symbols in human memory. In Knossos, it is carved into stone, pressed into clay, drawn on walls like a secret no one dares forget. Not a tool of war, but a key. We see it now and think of violence, of blades, of severed things. But in the hands of the Minoans, the Labyrinth was not an instrument of destruction. It was an emblem of balance, a mirror in motion, a curve for each half of the world, sun and shadow, life and death, man and woman. Two blades joined at the center, not to cut, but to remind. The word Labyrinth may be older than Greek, perhaps born in Anatolia or deeper still from forgotten tongues. Some scholars suggest that the word labyrinth, our winding palace of myth, comes from it. The house of the Labyrinth, not the house of a monster, but of meaning. A temple spiraling around a symbol not of fear, but of the sacred feminine. In Minoan belief, is the mother who reigns. Not distant, not abstract, but close, touching earth, animals, and wombs with equal reverence. She's not always kind, but she is always whole. She can birth the world with one breath and bury it with the next. The Labyrinth was her mark, not to conquer, but to consecrate, to draw the invisible line between chaos and order, to say, this is sacred, do not cross. You see it carved into the sacred halls of Knossos, etched above doorways, hidden in shrine alcoves, sometimes held by priestesses in delicate hands, not raised in battle, but lifted in invocation. The axe did not speak of death. It spoke of thresholds. There is a story, half myth, half breath, of a ritual chamber deep within the palace, where light only entered once a year, falling directly on a stone carved with the Labyrinth. When the sun struck it, the chamber filled with silence, as though the goddess herself had arrived, not in body, but in balance. This was not a place to fear. It was a place to feel, to remember that power is not always loud, that wrath can be quiet, that the most divine force in the world may not lift a weapon, but simply wait, watching, knowing the weight of both ends of the blade. In later myths, the double axe becomes twisted. It is given to male gods, wielded in war, its meaning drained of subtlety. But here, in Knossos, its truth remains, even in ruin, even worn by rain and centuries. The Labyrinth still stares back at you with calm intensity. Two sides, one purpose, a reminder that life is not either slash or, it is both. And the mother? She is still here, in the red columns, in the fertile earth, in the cracked walls where lizards sun themselves in the quiet. She does not rage, but if forgotten, she will rise, not to punish, but to remind that what is born from the earth must answer to it. So tonight, if you feel the weight of opposites pulling at your chest, softness and strength, joy and sorrow, wildness and stillness, do not fight it. Hold them both. Let the Labyrinth in you remain steady. Two edges joined, not to harm, but to honor what you are. Whole, wounded, holy. Step into any chamber of Knossos where the walls have not yet crumbled into pure dust, and you will meet them, painted in ochre and cobalt, outlined in sienna and gold. They stand beneath the flaking ceilings of time. The women, their eyes are wide, almond-shaped, unwavering. Their lips, painted red like pomegranate seeds, curve not in invitation, but in knowing. They were flounced skirts and open bodices, revealing breasts not with shame or seduction, but with a bold, almost ritual clarity. They do not ask to be seen. They expect it. We do not know their names, but they knew themselves. Some say they were priestesses. Others believe they were goddesses or highborn women of influence. Perhaps they were all three. For in Knossos, the boundary between mortal and divine was soft, like the sea at dusk. What matters more than titles is that they were painted at all, not as servants, not as background, but as central figures in the spiritual and ceremonial life of the palace. They are not the muses of someone else's story. They are the authors of presence. In one fresco, a woman holds snakes in her outstretched hands. They curl up her arms like veins of power. Her stare is not aggressive, but alert, piercing, sacred. In another, a group of women gather in a procession. Their garments flutter with movement captured mid-ceremony. They seem to be singing, or perhaps invoking. One turns her head to the side, as if caught between worlds, between the chant and the silence, between the visible and the invisible. Their hairstyles are elaborate, coiled like the spirals that decorate Minoan pottery. Their waists are impossibly narrow. Their postures, proud and upright, speak of belonging, not performance. These are not women painted for male desire. They are painted to embody something, a rhythm, a rite, a realm we no longer remember how to enter. It is tempting to romanticize, to imagine a matriarchal paradise, a society ruled by priestesses in harmony with the moon. But history is rarely so pure. Still, something here is different, radically so, in a world where most ancient civilizations relegated women to shadow. Knossos placed them at the center of light. In Minoan art, women outnumber men, and when men are present, they often seem in motion, serving, leaping, following. The women stand still, and in stillness there is power. What did they believe? That the body was sacred, that nature and divinity were not separate, that ritual was not escape, but return. Perhaps these women were more than individuals. Perhaps they were archetypes, embodiments of the Great Mother in her many forms. The hunter, the nurturer, the prophetess, the serpent, the sea. Or perhaps they were simply women, seen, honored, remembered, and that alone makes them rare. Even in ruin, even behind glass in modern museums, their eyes still follow you, not to haunt, to challenge. They ask without words, what have you forgotten? About the body, about the sacred, about what it means to be whole. They are not waiting for rescue. They are not here to be interpreted. They are here to remind. So tonight, close your eyes and let one of them step from the wall. Let her lead you by the hand, past painted dolphins, past echoing staircases, into a chamber lit by oil lamps and intention. Feel her silence, not empty, but alive. She will not speak. She will only look at you, with eyes made of memory. And in that gaze, perhaps you will see a piece of yourself that has not yet been born. We all know the story, or think we do. A monstrous creature, half man, half bull, trapped in the heart of a labyrinth. A punishment for hubris. A secret kept beneath the palace of Knossos. A hunger fed by innocent lives. Until a hero, Theseus, descends into the dark, guided by a thread, and slays the beast. Order restored. The monster defeated. The story told. But what if? What if the monster never asked to be caged? What if the Minotaur was not a creature of evil, but a symbol of something we have never dared to face? They called him Asterion, the Starry One, a name that shines, even in the dark. Born, according to myth, from an unholy union. Pasiphae, queen of Crete, cursed to fall in love with a bull. Not just any bull, a sacred white one, sent by Poseidon, a divine being in animal form. And from that unnatural love, a child, a boy with the head of a beast. But myths are never so literal. They speak in mirrors. And this one, it reflects our fear of the in-between. The Minotaur was not evil. He was unclassifiable, not fully man, not fully animal, something in the middle, something we could not control, could not categorize. So we locked it away, deep beneath the palace, deep beneath consciousness, because what we cannot name, we call dangerous, and what we do not understand, we imprison. The labyrinth, then, was not a cage. It was a womb, a place where this being, neither God nor man, neither beauty nor terror, was hidden. So the world would not have to see itself. Because we are all, in some way, part bull, part instinct, part rage, part desire. We are all, in some corner of ourselves, unacceptable. And the myth doesn't ask us to kill the Minotaur. That was Theseus' story. But what if that was the wrong ending? Think again of Knossos, of the bull leapers, of the frescoes where humans dance with beasts, not to defeat them, but to move with them, to vault over danger, to merge with wildness, to become more by embracing the very thing we fear. The Minoans didn't demonize the bull. They worshipped it. They painted it. They danced with it. The monster, perhaps, was never theirs. It was ours. And Theseus, the so-called hero, he enters the labyrinth with a sword and a thread. He leaves with a story of conquest, but he never returns. Not really, because those who enter the labyrinth change, not because they kill a monster, but because they meet themselves. There is something unbearably human in the Minotaur, something abandoned, misunderstood, imprisoned by others' fear, reduced to appetite when perhaps he only ever wanted to be seen. He had a name, Asterion. He had a mother who loved him. He had a home, however dark, and in the silence of the labyrinth, he waited, not for death, but for recognition. So tonight, ask yourself, what part of you lives in shadow? What piece of you wears horns and waits in silence and dreams not of escape, but of acceptance? The Minotaur is not what you think. He is not the enemy. He is the part of you that still hopes someone will walk into the dark, not to slay you, but to sit beside you and say, I see you. If you walk the halls of Knossos at dusk, when the sun slides low across the Cretan hills, and shadows stretch like fingers through broken columns, you'll see it, faint at first, like a bruise in the stone, a trace of something once vibrant, now half swallowed by time. But then your eyes adjust, and there it is, color, still clinging to the plaster, still breathing in ochre, in cobalt, in deep cinnabar red. The walls may be crumbling, but their stories have not yet faded. They are painted in memory, unlike the severe palaces of later empires. Gray, angular, stripped of softness. Knossos was a canvas, a living, radiant body. Every surface once bloomed with pigment. Ceilings, columns, floors, even staircases were dressed in hue, as if the act of walking itself deserved beauty. The Minoans did not see color as decoration. They saw it as language. The red of the columns, deep, almost blood-like, wasn't just for contrast. It was symbolic, vital. It pulsed with the energy of life, of protection, of the sacred earth that gave them clay and wine and fire. The blues, bold and serene, were the sea itself. Not just an element, but a deity, a rhythm, a boundary between here and elsewhere. And the golds, oh, the golds, not always made of metal, but painted as if to glow. A reminder of the sun, of the divine light that touched even the darkest corners of the labyrinth. The frescoes told no tales of conquest, no kings on horseback, no spears raised, no slaves in chains. Instead, they sang of movement, of ritual, of coexistence, a leaping bull, a floating fish, a woman in a flounced skirt, arms raised, not in defense, but in devotion. These are not walls that sought to impress by power. They sought to invite you inward, into myth, into ceremony, into something softer than history, but stronger than time. And yet, what makes these frescoes truly miraculous is not just that they existed, but that they survived. Painted over 3,000 years ago, fragile as skin, they endured earthquakes, abandonment, weather, and a long forgetting of centuries. Some bled down the walls like tears, others flaked into dust, only to be pieced back together by careful modern hands. Restored, imagined, resurrected, and still, they speak. One fresco, known as the Prince of the Lilies, shows a youth crowned with flowers, stepping lightly through a landscape of grace. His body is fluid, his posture proud, but not aggressive. Is he a priest? A god? A memory? Or simply an ideal? The embodiment of harmony between man and nature? Another, the dolphin fresco, swims above a queen's chamber. The dolphins twist and leap as if caught mid-laughter, not imprisoned in a frame, but free. Even here, inside stone walls, the Minoans painted freedom. Perhaps this was their secret. They knew the world could crumble. They knew palaces fall, but they believed in beauty, as resistance, as remembrance. They painted their walls not for themselves, but for someone to come after, someone like you, someone who would stand centuries later, in quiet awe, and feel, not think, but feel, that this place once pulsed with color, that it still does. So tonight, when you close your eyes, let there be walls. Let your dreams bleed blue and red and gold. Let memory paint you in layers. Let the centuries flake away. And if you listen closely, beneath the silence of plaster and stone, you might still hear the rhythm of a brushstroke, gentle, sacred, making time bloom again. We often look upward when we imagine the divine, toward the sky, the stars, the gods who live above. But in Knossos, the sacred began beneath your feet. The stones underfoot were not mere foundations. They were instruments, composed, aligned, smoothed with precision, waiting to be touched by bare soles, by rhythm, by ritual. These are not just floors. They were altars turned horizontal. Step softly, beneath the dust and tourist footprints, beneath the layers of modern curiosity. The ground still pulses with memory. Each slab of gypsum, pale as milk, cool as sea wind, was laid with care, as if the builders knew that what touches the feet touches the spirit. In Knossos, you did not ascend to reach the sacred. You descended into it, down staircases that spiraled like thought, into chambers where stone embraced you. And once there, you did not kneel. You moved. The Minoans were dancers. Their ceremonies did not unfold in silent reverence, but in motion, graceful, deliberate, alive. They danced not to entertain. They danced to transform. The floor beneath them held the echo of generations. Feet circling fire, feet stomping in rhythm, feet gliding through thresholds between worlds. Every footfall was a word, every turn a prayer. They understood something we've forgotten, that the body itself is a ritual, that meaning enters not just through the mind, but through movement. There are signs faint but enduring, that some floors were aligned to lunar cycles, that light would pour in from above on certain nights, falling across the polished stone like a path of stars. Imagine stepping into that beam, feeling it wrap around your ankles, knowing that for this moment, just this one, you were exactly where the world wanted you to be. Not above, not below, but in perfect harmony with earth and sky. Archaeologists have found shallow basins in these floors, some filled with ash, some with liquid, some with nothing but shadow. Were they offerings? Markers? Mirrors? We do not know, and perhaps that's the point. Ritual is not meant to be explained. It is meant to be felt, like music you cannot transcribe, like scent without a source. It moves through you, and you are changed. One theory speaks of dances performed in circles, not as choreography, but as cosmic reenactment, a mimicking of the stars, of planets orbiting their secret truths, of the seasons spinning endlessly. In these dances, the floor became more than surface. It became universe, a stage upon which humanity stepped briefly into the skin of eternity. The floors of Knossos remain. Not all, but enough. Enough to tell us that something holy once happened here. That joy was not an afterthought, but a path. And the feet, calloused, painted, adorned with bells or dust, were not sinners nor saints. They were instruments of invocation. So tonight, let your breath be soft. Imagine yourself barefoot on cold stone. A single lamp flickers behind you. The walls echo with silence and memory. Then slowly, you begin to move, not to impress, not to perform, but to remember. With each step, you become less mind, more rhythm, less question, more heartbeat, until finally the floor itself responds. Not with sound, but with something deeper, a sense that you're home, that the ground beneath you is sacred, and it always has been. They were not just insects, not here, not in Knossos, the bees, tiny, golden-bodied beings that carried more than nectar. They carried souls. In Minoan Crete, the bee was not simply a creature. It was a symbol, a mystery, a guardian between life and death. In tombs scattered across the island, archaeologists have found bee-shaped pendants, golden artifacts so delicate, so intricate, that they seem less like ornaments and more like spells. The most famous among them, discovered in Malia, depicts two bees facing one another, joined at the thorax, wings spread, a drop of honey, perhaps life itself, suspended between them. But what they're doing is not flight. It's not hunger. It's communion, as if they were passing not food, but memory. In a world of the Minoans, death was not a door slammed shut. It was a spiral, leading inward and inward still, toward something else. And the bee, small and tireless, was believed to walk that spiral with grace. Some believe that priestesses in Minoan culture were called Melissi, the bees. They were keepers of sacred rites, guardians of rebirth, and intermediaries between worlds. The buzzing of bees was not background noise. It was invocation, a song that hummed in tune with ritual, a vibration that opened the ear not to sound, but to meaning. Imagine a burial site carved into stone, simple yet precise. No grand pyramid, no towering obelisk, just a hollowed chamber, a vessel, and inside, the bones of the dead, gently wrapped, a bee pendant placed upon the chest, not to adorn, but to guide, to lead the soul through the dark terrain beyond breath, to carry it back to the mother, not in sorrow, but in song. For the bee is more than a symbol of death. It is a symbol of transformation, a creature that begins as worm, encloses itself in shadow, and emerges, wings spread, golden, singing, a death and a rebirth, again and again. The ancients knew. They saw it in nature, and they mirrored it in myth. There is a legend, older than parchment, that the great mother goddess could take the form of a bee, that she hummed through sacred caves, drawn to honey as the body is drawn to warmth. In this form, she visited the dead, not to judge them, but to collect them, to carry what was essential back to the hive of eternity, and leave behind only silence, Knossos, too, hums with this vibration. The palace, its chambers, its light wells, its constant movement, feels less like a fortress and more like a hive, intricate, alive, buzzing with unseen purpose. Its priestesses moved through corridors like bees through combs, their rituals feeding not gods, but cycles of day and night, of season and seed, of birth, blood, and return. Even today, the bees of Crete are said to make some of the finest honey in the world, not because of the flowers, but because of the memory in the earth. Perhaps the bees still remember what we've forgotten. That sweetness is born of labor. That death is not a silence, but a song we no longer know how to hear. So tonight, if you find yourself wrapped in quiet, listening to something you can't quite name, perhaps it is not the wind. Perhaps it is the buzz of remembrance. The bees are near, not to sting, but to guide, to carry what is ready, to hum the lullaby of release. And in that hum, you're not ending. You're beginning again. There comes a moment in every story, quiet and irreversible, when something shifts, a breath missed, a step misplaced, a sound that never returns. For Knossos, that moment came not with invasion, but with shadow and ash. They say the sun disappeared, not behind a cloud, but behind a scream of earth and sea. Not gently, but suddenly. One day there was warmth, and the next there was darkness, a blackness so thick it had weight, settling on rooftops, coating frescoes, suffocating the vibrant palette of Minoan life. In a shroud of gray, it may have begun far to the north, on the island we now call Thera, known in myth and map as Santorini, a volcanic paradise, a ring of land cradling a restless fire beneath. And one day, somewhere around 1600 BCE, that fire spoke, not in flame, but in eruption, a detonation so vast that it tore the island apart, sent tsunamis racing across the Aegean, and spat ash into the sky for weeks. The noise must have been unimaginable, a roar that swallowed prayers, a thunder that outlasted day. Knossos did not crumble that morning. Its stones remained, its columns still stood, but something deeper began to tilt. Crops withered under a sunless sky. Rains came when they weren't meant to. The sea no longer followed its rhythms. And the people, those who once danced with bulls and painted dolphins, began to doubt. What good are rituals when the gods grow silent? What power does beauty hold when the land goes still? In a culture so deeply tied to nature, to the moon, to the tides, to fertility and flame, a disruption of balance was more than disaster. It was desecration, a breach in the ancient covenant between earth and those who walk it. And slowly, silently, a world began to recede, not with war, but with withdrawal. Fewer offerings, fewer processions, fewer songs, as if the palace itself, once so alive, had begun to forget how to breathe. There are signs, abandoned rooms, storage vessels left full, untouched, frescoes unfinished, as if the artists set down their brushes and simply didn't return. No bones of battle, no weapons strewn, just absence and ash. Some believe it wasn't only the volcano. That Thera was the first crack, but others followed. Earthquakes, famine, maybe even whispers of foreign invaders drawn to a kingdom now weakened. But none of it feels decisive. There is no single blow, only a slow unraveling, as if the soul of Knossos was stepping back into the earth. Inch by inch, a retreat, a mourning, a long whispered goodbye. And yet, even as the sky darkened, some kept lighting lamps, some kept singing softly, some perhaps still danced, not in celebration, but in remembrance, to hold on to what could still be held, to say, We were here. We lived. We made beauty. We worshipped the sky, even when it turned its face. So tonight, when your thoughts turn heavy, when the light fades too soon, when the world feels uncertain, remember Knossos. Remember that even the most radiant civilizations can know darkness, and still, something of them remains. Not in ashes, but in echoes. The sky may turn black, but morning still waits. Always. Fire, the symbol of destruction in so many tales. A red roar that devours cities, temples, lives. The weapon of gods, the curse of kings. But the fire that came to Knossos did not kill like that. It arrived not in fury, but in weariness, not in the hands of invaders, but perhaps in the hands of those who once called the palace home. There is no record of a siege, no arrowheads lodged in stone, no broken blades, no crushed helmets, no screams preserved in soil. The skeletons we find here are rare, spaced out, unhurried. They did not speak of panic. And yet one day, the fires came, and Knossos burned. What does it mean when a palace burns, but no one fights to save it? What does it mean when the grand halls of ritual and reverence fill with smoke and no one sounds the alarm? The answer is not always violence. Sometimes it is abandonment. Sometimes resignation. Sometimes fire is not a murder. It is a funeral. Archaeologists have found the traces. Charred timbers, blackened frescoes, rubble where once stood harmony. But what's missing is just as telling. There are no signs of looting, no frantic barricades, no foreign symbols hastily carved in conquest. Instead, there are storerooms still full, tools left neatly by the door, vessels unbroken, waiting for hands that never returned. As if the people walked out one morning and chose not to return, as if they had simply let it go. Some believe the fire was ritual, a cleansing, an offering of flame to the gods, to what could not be restored. Others think it was the palace itself, wounded, abandoned, collapsing inward in one final breath of flame. Or maybe, just maybe, it was an accident. A single oil lamp tipped in the wrong place. A smoldering coal left in a hearth. A small mistake that finished what the shadows had already begun. But what matters is not the cause. What matters is the feeling left behind. Not horror, but grief. The fire didn't scream. It whispered. It flickered through the megarons, licked the painted walls, melted the pigments into new, ghostly shapes. It drifted up through the skylights, past red columns, past altar stones, and vanished into a sky that had long since stopped answering. There's something deeply human in that. Not every ending comes with drama. Sometimes a thing dies slowly, and then suddenly, like a breath you don't realize was your last, until the silence that follows it. Knossos did not fall. It ceased. Not because it was defeated, but because it was done. Because the people who had built it, who had loved it, who had danced and painted and prayed within it, had changed, and the palace no longer fit the world they were entering. Even in ruins, the fire left a strange kind of peace. It sealed what it touched, preserved some of the walls, baked the clay tablets in a hardened memory. What we know of Knossos today, what we can still touch, still read, still imagine, survived because of that fire, as if the flames didn't devour, but sealed the myth in amber, not to destroy it, but to keep it. So tonight, if you feel the ember flickering low, if something in your life feels like it's ending quietly, without war, without warning, let it burn softly. Let it be a fire that doesn't kill. Let it be the kind that clears the ground for something else, not ruin, but remembrance. Knossos was not conquered. It was released. There's a sorrow more haunting than destruction, more delicate than fire, more lasting than ash. It is the sorrow of repetition, of rebuilding something not because it still breathes, but because we cannot let go. And so, Knossos, once the living heart of Crete, once myth made stone, did not vanish in one single death. It lingered. It limped. It was rebuilt. Again, and again, and again. After the fire, after the silence, after the sky forgot how to be blue, the palace was not left asleep. Not entirely. New hands came. Different feet walked the same floors. Stone was added where old stone had cracked. Walls were raised again, though never as high, never as complete, like a memory forced to repeat itself long after it has lost its meaning. They reused old stones, took the sacred, sun-kissed blocks, and turned them into homes, into walls, into paths. They didn't do it to dishonor. They did it to continue. But the rhythm had changed. The dance was gone. The music that once flowed through the columns was now static, heavy. Something essential had faded. The soul had moved on, but the body kept standing. One layer buried another, then another, each new generation not quite understanding the one beneath it. And so the Knossos we see today is not a single place, but a palimpsest, a manuscript written, erased, rewritten, never truly clean. Some corridors were rebuilt over collapsed ones. Some frescoes painted over older pigment. Even Arthur Evans, centuries later, would add his own cement, his own colors, believing he was reviving the palace, but perhaps only deepening its dream. What happens to a city that's rebuilt too many times? It begins to forget what it was. Its foundations ache with contradiction. Its symbols confuse themselves. Was this a throne room or a granary? Was that altar original or imagined? The past becomes a labyrinth, not of stone, but of versions. And somewhere in the middle, the original Knossos, that breathing, painted, sun-washed place, drowns beneath the weight of reconstruction. But perhaps that's what we do too. We fall, we burn, and we rebuild. Not once, but many times. Not as we were, but almost. A little less whole, a little more guarded, still walking the same paths, still painting over the same scars. There's a cracked step in Knossos, just one, barely noticeable, smoothed by centuries of feet, its edge worn down not by war, but by return. People kept walking it, even when the palace had nothing left to say, as if they were trying to reach something they didn't realize had already gone. Perhaps Knossos did not fall once. Perhaps it fell every time it was raised again, without remembering its original song, like a dream we try to re-enter, but always wake up too soon. So tonight, if you find yourself trying to rebuild, a hope, a love, a self, pause, ask, am I restoring something real? Or am I layering over what's already asking to be released? Some things are meant to rise again. Others are meant to rest. Knossos, once a masterpiece, became a memory, then a mosaic, then a question, a city rebuilt too many times, until what it was could no longer be found. There are stories carved in stone, sung in frescoes, danced in courtyards, passed from hand to hand in the shape of clay. But there is another story at Knossos, one that has no voice, only symbols, curves, crosses, clusters of signs pressed gently into wet tablets. By hands long gone, they called it linear A, and we have not yet heard what it tried to say. It appears like breath held in clay, a script so strange, so ancient, so quietly stubborn, that it has refused to yield its meaning to even the most patient minds. Hundreds of tablets, lines and lines of signs, some graceful, some geometric, some hauntingly familiar, and yet always out of reach. They sit now in museum drawers in climate-controlled glass, waiting not to be read, but to be remembered, we deciphered Linear B, the later script of Mycenaean scribes, a practical language, inventories, lists, bureaucracy made visible. But Linear A, it stays where it is, unbroken, unbowed. It is not a language of conquest. It is a language of a world we do not know how to enter. Scholars have tried, decade after decade, word after word. They've compared it to early Greek, to Hittite, to Cypriot, to forgotten Cretan tongues. They've mapped its grammar, measured its syntax, cataloged its signs, but it remains opaque. And in that opacity, in that refusal to be revealed, there's a kind of sacredness. Because what if Linear A is not just a script? What if it is a veil, a protection spell, a last boundary, a whisper only meant for those who once spoke it under a certain moon, on certain ground, in certain air now gone? The Minoans, you see, left few written records. And what they did leave behind was not boastful. No epic poems, no royal decrees, no engraved monuments screaming names across centuries. Just tablets, small, simple, clay. Some seem to be records of grain, of oil, of offerings. But even that is uncertain. Others, we do not know. Perhaps prayers, perhaps recipes, perhaps secrets, and perhaps they weren't meant to last. Or, more haunting still, perhaps they were, but only for those whose minds held the key. There is something beautiful in this kind of silence. A language that doesn't translate, but resists. A reminder that not everything ancient was meant to be consumed. Not everything broken was meant to be rebuilt. Some things were meant simply to remain, to stand as soft barriers between then and now. To say, I existed, but I was not made for you. And yet, we keep trying, because that's what we do. We open the boxes of time. We trace symbols in the dark. We dream that if we listen closely enough, the past might speak in a voice we recognize. But what if its truest voice is the one we can't understand? So tonight, listen not for words, but for silence. Let the unspoken become its own kind of story. Feel the curve of those unknown signs, as if they were carved into your own breath. And trust that mystery can be more generous than meaning. Linear, it does not speak to us. It sings to something older, and that song still lingers in the clay. There are no surviving scriptures from the Minoans, no sacred texts, no carved commandments, no chants etched into marble or copper or flame. And yet, they worshipped. We know this not from words, but from atmosphere, from ash basins in corners too quiet for politics, from tiny altars that still smell faintly of char and clove, from soot stains on the ceilings of rooms that faced no door, but always faced inward. Ritual, for the Minoans, was not pageantry. It was presence. Imagine a chamber deep within Knossos, a room with low ceilings, curved walls, and only a sliver of light slicing through from above. There is no throne, no priest in golden vestments, no crowd, only you and the smoke. The air is thick with it, a blue-gray mist that doesn't rise, but spills like breath from the mouth of the earth. It curls around your ankles. It moves like memory, slow, sacred, reluctant to leave. It smells of resins from forgotten trees, of time gathered under moonlight, of oils pressed by hands that never named their own gods. And within that smoke, you begin to see, not with your eyes, with your skin. The Minoan world was not separated between the sacred and the mundane. It was woven. The goddess lived not above, but within, in the olive tree, in the snake that shed its skin in the courtyard, in the water that hummed beneath the floor. Their rituals reflected that. Not grand spectacles, but gestures, movements, breath, a raised arm, a whispered name, a pouring of wine on a stone. Some rooms in Knossos hold were called pillar crypts, small chambers with a single column at the center, sometimes marked with double axes, labyrinths, carved faintly into its skin. Here, the offerings were not burned in heaps. They were dropped softly, drop by drop, ash by ash, into holes in the earth. Not to cast wishes into heaven, but to feed the ground, to commune downward, with what had come before, with what still listened below. In the darkness of these rituals, light became a visitor, rare, deliberate, a torch flickering in a stone basin, a sliver of sun falling across an altar only on the solstice. And in that chiaroscuro of flame and shadow, the divine did not descend. It emerged from you, from the silence, from the way smoke dances like thought. They did not speak their gods' names loudly. They invoked them with rhythm, with repetition, with space. A room became sacred not by decoration, but by emptiness, not by volume, but by absence made holy. Because when the air was still enough, the Minoans believed something more ancient than words would arrive. A presence, a knowing, a being that did not need to be seen to be real. And so the rituals continued, year after year, moon after moon, some in caves, cool and dripping, some on rooftops, under stars as old as silence, some in secret, where no record would ever remain, not out of fear, out of respect, because true ritual is not meant to impress. It is meant to transform. We will never know all they believed. We will never decode each gesture, each flame, each offering, but we don't need to, because belief, true belief, leaves more than artifacts. It leaves air, air that still hums in the rooms of Knossos, air that still thickens with every visitor's breath, air that remembers. So tonight, light no candle, speak no word, simply sit in the dark, and let the smoke rise in your imagination. Let it move through your ribs, across your mind, down into the corners of your soul you've left untouched for too long. There, in that quiet, a ritual begins, not when you learned, but when you've always known, because what was sacred to them still is. When we speak of gods, we often imagine them crowned, clothed in lightning, justice, vengeance, in temples taller than memory, in names carved into mountains, in voices loud enough to split the sky. But the gods of Knossos, they had no names, or at least none we've been able to keep. They did not leave behind stone statues of themselves. No seated Zeus, no winged Aphrodite, no pantheon of marble muscle and golden lore. They left curves, horns, spirals, serpents coiled like time around the arms of women who didn't fear them. They left absence, and in that absence, presence. The Minoan world was not ruled by gods who shouted. It was cradled by gods who listened. They were not up above, waging battles in clouds. They were here, in the sea that changed moods like a lover, in the wind that spun secrets through cypress trees, in the hills that swelled like the hips of a resting mother. The divine was not elsewhere. It was everything, not an idea, not a being, but a pattern, a presence woven into motion, breath, flame, fruit. They saw God not as a king, but as a rhythm, in what we call today the peak sanctuaries, high on the ridgelines of Crete. Worshippers brought no idols. They brought themselves, their hands, their fears, their thanks, simple offerings, clay figurines of animals, tiny models of houses, miniature axes, little limbs sculpted from earth, not as toys, but as prayers, not save me, but see me, not strike down, but touch gently, down in the valleys, in the heart of the palaces. The symbols repeat, the double axe, the horns of consecration, the spiral that curls into itself like memory. But none of these point to a specific deity. They do not say who. They say what. What is sacred? What is alive? What is to be moved around in silence? Not explained with titles. There is one figure, though, who lingers. Not in name, but in form. A woman, bare-breasted, poised, wide-eyed, arms raised, snakes winding up from her wrists as if she were calling the earth itself to speak. We call her the snake goddess, but that name is ours, not hers. To the Minoans, she may have been the goddess, or a priestess embodying her, or an idea too complex to separate from existence itself. She is not passive, not afraid, not begging. She stands at the threshold, between wild and tame, between death and rebirth, between chaos and the coiling of meaning. The Minoan gods, if they can be called that, do not sit on thrones. They rise in motion, in the bull's leap, in the pour of libation, in the hush that falls when smoke curls around a shadowed room. And they do not come when summoned. They arrive when recognized, not through dominance, but through attention. And perhaps this is why they remain unnamed. Because names trap. They define. They draw lines where mystery prefers a blur. To name a god is to claim it, to control it, to cage it in syllables. But the divine in Knossos, it cannot be held, only honored, only invited. It is no wonder, then, that linear, their only surviving written language, remains undeciphered. Because perhaps their truths were never meant to be read, only lived, felt in the rhythm of waves, in the thrum of bees, in the exhale of earth after rain. A truth that doesn't require a name, because it already knows who you are. So tonight, as the room dims, and your mind begins to drift, do not seek words, do not ask for answers. Simply be still, and somewhere between thought and dream, you may feel them, not in voice, not in form, but in the way your breath slows, in the way the air shifts, in the way something ancient turns gently in the dark, and lets you rest, because not all gods need names. Some simply remember you. You cannot speak of Knossos, not truthfully, without speaking of the sea, not just as geography, not just as horizon, but as presence, because the Minoans were not landlocked dreamers. They were ocean-born, their myths salt-washed, their cities cradled by winds that carried voices, spices, and stories from across the wine-dark sea. The Aegean was not an obstacle. It was a thread, a current that tied Crete to Egypt, to Anatolia, to the Cyclades. A path paved not in stone, but in trust. Trust in tides, in stars, in the moods of Poseidon, who sometimes gave safe passage, and sometimes swallowed men whole. But the Minoans did not fear the sea. They belonged to it. From the palace of Knossos, set inland but never far, the scent of salt was always near. The calls of gulls circling over distant harbors, the light shimmering on the columns, as if mimicking the water's skin. And the goods they stored? Jars of olive oil, vessels of wine, boxes of saffron and fish, and tin carried from lands so distant. The names have long since vanished. All of it arrived by sea. Their wealth floated on its back. Their language was shaped by its rhythm. Their art, those dolphins leaping above the queen's chamber, was born from its breath. The sea gave, and sometimes it took, storms that swallowed fleets, tsunamis that erased coastlines, and perhaps, one day, the ships that never returned. Some scholars believe the end of Minoan dominance came not by sword or flame, but by wave, the eruption of Thera, the wall of water that followed, the sudden, brutal reminder that the sea, too, has memory, and it remembers how to rise. And yet, despite all, they did not turn away. They rebuilt their ports. They offered libations to the depths. They painted marine life, not with fear, but with adoration. Octopuses dancing across faces, fish schooling like stars, boats drawn with sails full and bows forward. Because the sea was not just trade, it was myth, it was mother, it was the road to the gods. And the road back, there is an old belief whispered along Mediterranean shores that souls return by sea, that when someone dies, the tide comes in just a little higher, as if carrying something unseen toward the coast. The Minoans may have believed this, too. They buried their dead facing the waves. They placed shelled jewelry with their bones. They laid their prayers in folded hands and let the breeze finish them, not to vanish, but to travel. And still, the sea remembers. It remembers the shape of their boats, the songs sung to guide them, the hands that carve prows like birds or beasts. Even now, deep beneath the modern surface, divers find amphorae settled like sleeping hearts, anchors made of stone, held in place by coral and time. The sea does not forget. It is the great archive, not of text, but of rhythm, not of empire, but of intimacy. So tonight, wherever you are, let the sea come to you. Close your eyes. Hear the hush of wave on sand, the deep pulse beneath the calm. Imagine a ship, not large, not grand, carved from cedar, painted with faded pigment, floating toward the stars. And on its deck, someone stands with eyes closed, trusting that the sea, in all its vastness, will remember the way home. And it does. It always does. Some stories are not told. They are remembered, half asleep, half true, like light trembling across the ocean floor. Atlantis, a name heavy with myth, light with longing, a city that rose in perfection and fell in pride, not gently, not gradually, but in a single blinding moment. It vanished, swallowed whole by the sea, erased from the maps of men, preserved only in imagination. We first hear of it from Plato. He writes not as a storyteller, but as a philosopher, a moralist, a warning, a tale told by Egyptian priests, echoed through Athenian mouths, and then pinned down by a thinker who used myth as mirror. He says Atlantis was vast, larger than Libya and Asia combined, a circle within a circle, a city of canals and gold and divine order. And then one day, a fall, an arrogance, a forgetting, a judgment from the gods, and the sea took it back. But ever since, the world has searched for it, in maps and sonar scans, in islands with strange ruins, in stories told by fishermen at dusk. Atlantis has been placed everywhere. Spain, Morocco, Antarctica, the Caribbean, and yes, Crete. Some scholars, careful, cautious, have looked at the volcanic ash, at the ruins of Akrotiri in Santorini, at the fading grandeur of Knossos, and asked, could this be it? Could the Minoans, peaceful, sea-bound, beautiful, have been the seed of Plato's tale? Could their sudden decline, their temples burned, their trade vanished, their silence, so absolute, have become the bones of Atlantis? The eruption of Thera, violent beyond comprehension, changed the world. Tsunamis struck, skies darkened, civilizations reeled, and Crete, so close, so vulnerable, was never the same. It fits in a way, too well perhaps, a city that flourished, danced with the sea, then disappeared beneath waves and time. Atlantis is a myth, but Knossos is real, and sometimes the two whisper to each other beneath the water. But here's the truth no one dares to speak. Atlantis is not a place. It's a feeling. It's the ache for something once perfect, a golden age, a harmony, a civilization that had learned how to live, with beauty, with balance, with meaning, and then lost it, not to barbarians, not to war, but to itself. That's why we keep searching, not for ruins, but for redemption. We need Atlantis to exist somewhere, because we need to believe that what was lost can be found again, that there was once a world where humans lived in rhythm, with sea, with soil, with stars, where the divine wasn't above, but around, within, where civilization wasn't built on conquest, but on coexistence. And perhaps Knossos was the closest we ever came. A palace without walls, a culture without armies, a people who danced instead of conquered. They were not perfect, no one ever is, but they believed in something different. And they left behind not just ruins, but possibility, a suggestion, a thread, a whisper floating just below the surface. So tonight, if you dream of a city underwater, of domes and courtyards glowing beneath waves, of songs that ripple through coral halls, don't ask whether it's real. Ask whether you've been there before. Not in this life, but in some part of you that still remembers how the world could have been. Atlantis is not lost. It is waiting, not to be found, but to be understood, and maybe to be rebuilt inside. Civilizations end, all of them, no matter how beautiful, no matter how wise, no matter how well they build their walls. The stones crack, the columns collapse, the pigments fade, the names are forgotten, but the myths drift. They cross seas, they hide in lullabies, they echo in the corners of stories whispered to children falling asleep beside other fires. Because a stone dies in silence. Pero unmito esse transforma. Knossos, the living labyrinth, the painted breath of the Aegean, the palace of bulls and bees and spirals, eventually vanished, not violently, not loudly, but slowly, like a candle allowed to burn to the end of its wick. And yet, its name, its breath, its spirit, somehow slipped through the cracks of time. Wounded, yes. Distorted often, but alive. It passed into Greek memory, like a dream half remembered, through Homer's verses, through Hesiod's genealogies, through the soft chant of poets who no longer knew what they were describing. Minos, once a title, perhaps became a king, then a tyrant, then a judge of the dead in the underworld. Pasiphae, once a priestess or queen, became a woman cursed to love a bull, and the palace, fluid, sacred, sunlit, was reshaped into a maze, dark and imprisoning, haunted by a beast that may never have existed. The labyrinth changed, the myth adapted, but survived, because stories do what ruins cannot. They walk, and in Athens, centuries later, boys and girls told tales of brave Theseus, of Ariadne with her thread, of a hero facing the darkness beneath the earth. Do they know these were echoes? Did they feel the salt air of Crete in those stories, even as they told them in stone cities and marble schools? Perhaps not, but the myth remembered for them. It held the memory of something older, softer, truer. It carried the whisper of Minoan voices, even as the world forgot how to pronounce them. Because that is what myth does. It distills. It protects. It takes what cannot be preserved in stone. The scent of beeswax, the hush before ritual, the rhythm of leaping feet, and sings it forward. Myth turns time into music, turns memory into story. And in doing so, it becomes immune to ruin. Knossos may have fallen, but its mythology bloomed in foreign soil. It crept into Roman plays, into Renaissance tapestries, into 19th century poetry, and finally, into the hands of Arthur Evans, a man who read the myth first, and only later found the stone. He came not just to excavate, but to fulfill, to stand inside a story, and try to give it back its form. Was he right? Was his version true? Maybe not, but the myth didn't mind. It had already survived so much worse. And so the myth of Knossos outlived its palace. It outlived its people. It outlived its language. It lives still, in the way we say labyrinth and mean mystery, in the way we speak of bulls and gods and golden ages, in the way we long for what we've never seen but somehow recognize. Because myth is not only memory, it is inheritance, a thread we are handed in the dark, like Ariadne's, to find our way back, not to stone, but to meaning. So tonight, when you find yourself tangled in the unknown, walking corridors within yourself, hearing echoes of stories you were never taught, follow them, follow the thread, because somewhere in the dark, the myth is still walking, and it knows the way. We don't think much about dust. We brush it away. We sweep it under things. We call it dirty, dead, meaningless. But dust is none of those things. Dust is what's left. When time has taken everything else, it is what remains. After fire, after collapse, after silence, it is not the end of something. It is its echo. In Knossos, there is dust everywhere, clinging to the feet of columns, settled in the hollows of broken jars, hiding in the seams where two stones once kissed. It is not the dust of disuse, but of survival. It is the ground bone of the past, the whispered breath of bees, the ash of burnt offerings, the worn skin of walls that once glowed with color and sweat and life. It is every moment made small, and yet in that smallness, it speaks. Arthur Evans understood this, perhaps. He wasn't just brushing away dirt. He was listening to the tiny fragments, the broken pieces, the things too light to matter to conquerors, but too full of memory to be ignored. He touched tablets crumbling at the edges. He walked over floors that had been stepped on by people whose names no longer exist. And in the dust, he found voice, not a loud one, but persistent, like a heartbeat beneath a grave. Dust is patient. It waits. It doesn't erode. It accumulates, layer by layer. It builds a kind of truth, not the kind that shouts in capitals, but the kind that settles and surrounds you slowly until you realize you are no longer looking at history. You are inside it. You are breathing it, and it is breathing you. You see, dust is not only what falls. It is what rises. When memory stirs, when a story is told, when a name is spoken after centuries of forgetting. It's what floats. When someone lights a lamp in a room that hasn't seen fire in 1,000 years. It's what dances in the slant of afternoon sun, over ruins and reverence alike. It is not decay. It is transmission. And in Knossos, dust became myth, and myth became dust again. They cycle through each other. A conversation without end. What is the labyrinth now? If not a cloud of ideas suspended in the air, what are its gods? If not dust light in the corners of a modern museum? And yet, stand still long enough, breathe deep enough, and they begin to move again. They shimmer, they hover, they remember you. There's something sacred in that. That what's most easily dismissed can carry the deepest knowing. That what crumbles can also cradle. That dust, so humble, so light, might be the most faithful storyteller of all, because it never chooses, it never edits, it simply holds and waits for someone to notice. So tonight, let go of the need for clarity. Let the grand dates and timelines fade, and instead, feel the dust. Feel it settle around your thoughts, softly, gently, like a blanket woven by centuries. Let it cover the noise. Let it soften the sharpness of logic. Let it carry you, not backwards, but deeper. Because the past does not call us to repeat it. It calls us to remember. And memory lives in the smallest things. In what settles and stays and waits to be stirred by breath. Knossos is not lost. It has simply changed form. It is not a palace anymore. It is dust. It is story. It is you, listening, feeling, closing your eyes now, as the last grain of ancient air floats quietly toward the floor, and become something sacred again. You came here for a story, a palace, a myth, a glimpse of something beautiful that once was. But as you've wandered through these chambers of memory, stone by stone, step by step, you may have started to feel it. This wasn't just Knossos. This wasn't just the past. This was you. The labyrinth, we were told, was a place. A structure built to confuse. A prison for a beast. A trap for the unworthy. But what if it was never built in stone at all? What if it was always internal? What if the twists and turns, the sudden corridors, the quiet chambers, the walls that seem to lead nowhere, were not built by deadless, but by your own longing? We search for meaning the way Theseus searched for the center, with thread, with fear, with hope clenched tight like a torch in the dark. We walk in circles. We chase echoes. We mistake memory for monsters. And then, if we are lucky, if we are honest, we arrive at the center and find ourselves, not whole, not heroic, but waiting, like the Minotaur, not a beast, not a villain, just a part of you that no one ever tried to understand. The real labyrinth never needed walls. It lives in questions without answers, in griefs that never healed cleanly, in dreams you abandoned years ago but still carry in the folds of your silence. It lives in the part of you that remembers being sacred before you learn to forget. Knossos, too, was a body, with arteries of hallway, lungs of open courtyards, a heart that pulsed with fire and water and ritual. And like any body, it changed. It was wounded. It healed in strange ways. It aged and was left behind, but it never stopped holding presence. Even now, in dust, in myth, in broken columns, bathed in morning light, it breathes, and so do you. The labyrinth was not a punishment. It was a path, a journey inward, a structure made not to trap, but to transform. Every time you turn a corner, you were meeting something forgotten. Every dead end wasn't a failure. It was an invitation to look again, to listen, to slow down. And the thread, the one Ariadne gave Theseus, you've been holding it this whole time. It's the thread of your voice, the quiet knowledge that guided you here, to this very moment, to this soft, dark room where the past sits beside you like an old friend. You don't need to slay anything. You don't need to win. You only need to see, to look into the center and realize. You were never lost. You were only becoming. So now, as the candles burn low, as the night presses closer, as the sound of distant waves reminds you the world is still turning, you may rest. You may exhale, because the journey didn't lead you to a ruin. It led you home, to the sacred within the broken, to the center of the story, to the center of you. The labyrinth was never beneath your feet. It was beneath your ribcage, winding, silent, alive. And now, you are ready to walk it again. Eyes open, thread in hand. No fear, just the gentle truth that even in the darkest corridor, you are not alone, and you never were. Into the journey, but not the story. Not ever.